Hey guys, I'm wandering around a forest just outside Port I've been told there's a scientist called Brian who's in this forest doing some sort of forestry research, but I don't know where his lab is. Wait a minute. I think we found it, guys. This looks like a science lab if I've ever seen one. Let's see if we can find Brian. Okay. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
Oh, we found you. I'm Dan from Midland Science. You said we could come down?
The video guy. Welcome.
That's exactly
Welcome
him.
to Dury.
Thank you so much. Can we come in and see what sort of stuff you're doing here?
Come on in and I'll show you around.
Perfect. Thank you. So we're here in Forest HQ. Thanks so much for having us, Brian, and I'm really eager to hear about the kind of experiments that you're doing here.
Thanks very much for coming along, Dan. As you found me, I'm sitting here in my little research lab in the middle of a commercial forest, Sitka Spruce outside, and we're here using a load of fairly fancy equipment to monitor and examine how trees grow in relation to climate.
Okay.
So we get a lot of things from trees, but we want to better understand how trees sequester carbon.
I've heard that, yeah, the trees pull carbon out of the atmosphere, and that's like one of their main jobs that they do for us. So, do you think we could go outside and have a look at some of the experimental setups and see the trees themselves?
Absolutely, let's do that.
So, Brian, you said that this is a Sitka spruce forest. I've heard some people think some bad stuff about Sitka spruce. Does it deserve the reputation it has?
No, I don't think so, Dan. Sitka spruce is a pretty amazing species. It's one of it's the third largest conifer species in the world, actually.
Okay.
Actually, I think the fourth largest tree in the world is a Sitka spruce tree, and it lives in California. So they grow to, that particular specimen is just under 100 meters tall.
Ooh.
So those are real champion trees.
Yeah.
And actually, Dan, the tallest tree in Ireland is the Sitka spruce, growing in Glendalough.
Okay.
Just, I think, 61.5 meters tall. It was measured last year.
Okay.
So they're really tall trees.
And
large.
what do we use them for?
So we use them for timber. This species that we're looking at here is like the Frisian cow of Irish forestry. So they are hugely productive. Their natural range is the fog belt in northeast America, and they like a maritime climate. They don't like extremes of temperature, and they like an environment with lots of moisture in it, and that's exactly what Ireland produces for it.
Okay.
So they grow excellently in our really soft soils and our wet soils, and they're extremely productive. So we get a lot of timber out of Sitka spruce.
But hold on, if you want to get timber, you have to cut down the trees, right? And is it not bad to cut down trees?
No, of course not. No, timber. Well, that's part of the natural cycle. So if you want timber, you have to cut a tree down. But that's the beauty of forestry, because the moment you cut a tree down, the next year you come back and you plant several more new trees, and they start growing again, and it's a renewable system.
Okay. And what about if you cut down a tree and if you use that wood in a building, yeah, is that like a way of keeping the carbon locked up and keeping it from getting into the atmosphere?
Exactly. So some people get a little bit confused about the purpose of trees and carbon sequestration. So when a tree grows, it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere, the carbon that you and I breathe out. And that's great for climate change, because that reduces the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And that tree, as it grows, gets bigger and bigger, and the amount of carbon that it stores gets larger and larger. But a tree and a forest can only grow to a certain size,
Yes.
and then that carbon stock stops. The way to increase and extend that sequestration rate is to use the products.
Okay.
And the longer your products last, their life cycle lasts, the longer that period of sequestration is.
Okay, very interesting. And you said you have a piece of equipment here that's monitoring kind of like how the forest is breathing, how the carbon comes in and out of it. Where could we find that?
Well, actually, you can hear the pump in the background, and if you look way up at the top of the mast there, you can hear our air sampler is busy sucking air samples from above the forest, and we're able to monitor the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere directly above the forest.
So you can directly measure how much carbon dioxide this forest is breathing in and out, essentially.
Actually in real time, Dan, which is pretty amazing.
Oh, wow.
So we can monitor the amount, as the trees are growing faster, they absorb more carbon out of the atmosphere, carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and our sensors at the top of the mast there can pick this up in real time as the trees respond to, let's say, a sunny day, or in fact, actually we can pick up when a cloud passes over, the light drops away a little bit and the trees don't grow quite as fast. So we get a real-time relationship between the tree growth rate and the climate.
Wow, that's fascinating to think about. You know, we don't think about trees breathing like we are and like, you know, changing the amount of carbon dioxide coming in and out of them. It's really interesting to think about that. How is Ireland's forestry industry? Like, do we have enough forests in Ireland to supply all of the timber that we need?
So Ireland's forest industry is relatively small in comparison to other countries. So we have 11% forest cover. I think the average forest cover in Europe is somewhere above 30%. But we're coming from a very small, a low base. So about 100 years ago, we had less than 1% forest cover.
Okay,
so
right.
at least now we have a significant forest industry.
Yes.
So we produce timber. We produce timber to service a lot of our own needs. So a lot of our structural timber now we grow here on the island.
Excellent.
We also export quite a lot of timber and timber products. So we have an industry at least.
Good. And so I'm curious as well, so we've been able to see that we're in this forest, we have trees here that we can turn into timber quite easily. We were able to monitor how the forest breathes, and also you said there's some other pieces of equipment you have around here. Could we have a look at some of those?
Absolutely, let's do that.
Right, so Brian has brought me here to this machine that looks like maybe it's where they boil the spuds here in the forest.
Actually, it's not, Dan, but this is an automatic soil respiration chamber.
Automatic soil respiration chamber.
Exactly. So it measures the respiration that comes from the soil. So the trees are busy sequestering carbon. Okay. They absorb carbon from the atmosphere and they include it in their tissue, but then leaves are all the time falling on the ground. So the litter falls to the ground, bits of bark, twigs and so on, and that falls and forms a litter layer here. Mm-hmm. And as it sits on the top of the soil, that starts decomposing.
Okay.
And as it decomposes, so the bacteria, the fungi, the insects that feed on all this litter material, they break it down, they feed on it, and it gets respired back to the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do is to measure using these chambers. We want to measure how much and how quickly that carbon is released back to the atmosphere. So our chamber drops automatically onto the collar, and it'll start measuring the concentration in the little atmosphere that above the soil.
Okay.
And we can measure that rate of respiration and how quickly that carbon is lost from the soil.
Uh-huh. And I saw they're all over the place here. You have them dotted all around.
They're dotted all around because soil and forests are really variable places. So if you take a spot measurement here, it'll be different, slightly different somewhere else. Okay. And so in science, we need to make lots of point measurements to come up with a good average. Uh-huh. And the nice thing about this is that it's this attribute, this loss of carbon from the soil, this is affected by management, and so you can optimize your management of a forest or any other land use for that matter by being careful about how it affects the losses from the soil. So if your management system can be streamlined to prevent losses from the soil, then you end up with a greater sum of carbon being absorbed by the whole ecosystem.
We want to take that carbon in, we want to put out as little as possible.
And we want to keep it in the ecosystem.
Very good. So can we go and have a look at another machine here?
Let's do that.
Great. So I think this is maybe one of Brian's art installations.
This Dan is a heater. So it's a forest heater.
Oh, it is.
So it's pretty nice this morning.
Yeah.
This is a climate change experiment. So we're simulating a future warmer climate here. Our heater is throwing out heat, and we're trying to heat this little experimental area here by 1 degree. We want to raise the air temperature and the soil temperature by 1 degree.
Okay, because we hear about that with climate change, like even a change of a half a degree or 1 degree makes a huge difference. So, and how will you measure the difference? What are you going to measure here that's happening?
So we're going to use the soil respiration measurement that we saw with the automatic respiration chamber. So this is a manual version of the same thing. Our pipes here are collars, and we can put a measurement chamber on top of those, and we look at what we find is that with increased temperature, the carbon in the soil and in the little air is respired quicker. So we lose more from the soil when the temperature increases.
Okay, very interesting. Well, that's fantastic. Well, maybe this one is more suited to cooking your potatoes than the other one. I never knew there was so many experiments going on in forests. So basically, we can have these forests that are designed to give us timber as efficiently as possible, and we can do scientific experiments to measure what effect they're having on carbon coming in and out of the atmosphere, and we can use these scientific experiments to figure out the best way to manage them in the future. Is that right?
Exactly. We expect climate change will actually make these trees, like Sitka spruce, grow even faster, at least for the short term. So we need as many Sitka spruce forests as we can to produce as much timber as possible and sequester large quantities of carbon out of the atmosphere.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for teaching me all those things today, and thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and we're already looking forward to seeing you on the next one.